Hi everyone and welcome to the 57th episode of Japanese Phonetics by Dogen. In this lesson I'll be answering some patron-submitted pronunciation questions. Let's get straight into it. Nathan asks, I'm increasingly curious about dialects of Japanese other than standard Tokyo Japanese. In particular, I'm going to be spending a good bit of time in southern Tohoku, but I'm having a lot of difficulty finding good resources on the dialects in that area. Do you know any good resources for studying the pronunciation of non-standard dialects of Japanese? Or do you have any advice for pursuing other dialects in general? Alright, so when it comes to dialects, it's important to note that most differ from standard Japanese in multiple ways. Kansai-ben, for example, uses not only unique words, conjugations, and mannerisms, but also unique pitch accent. And this is true for many, although not all, Japanese dialects. During my Japanese studies and research for this course, I found that most English-based resources when it comes to dialects cover the aforementioned unique words and conjugations, but rarely cover the pitch accent for any dialect other than Kansai-ben. And while some Japanese resources, such as this, the Nihongo Shinmeikai Nihongo Accento Jiten, or this, the Nihongo Accento Nyumon volume, talk about the pitch accent of various Japanese dialects, it's always in very advanced, specialized Japanese. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's very difficult to comprehensively study any Japanese dialect other than Kansai-ben. Thus, if you are dead set on learning a certain dialect, such as Tohoku-ben, then I think it's best to take an immersion-based approach. Try to make a lot of local friends, and if possible, find a movie or TV show that was filmed in the area and watch it constantly. Okay, moving on. Timothy writes, hopping on to Nathan's dialect question, can you briefly talk about what cultural associations Japanese people have with different regional dialects? For example, I've heard that speaking Tohoku-ben makes one seem like a country bumpkin. And do Japanese people intentionally adopt regional dialects to evoke a certain mood? Like I might start using y'all and drawling a bit if I want to come across as casual and folksy. Thanks. Great question. Most dialects, again with Kansai-ben being perhaps the one major exception, do sound rather rural to the typical speaker of standard Japanese. And while I have heard standard Japanese speakers use certain dialects, as you've mentioned, it's almost always in a joking and sometimes even slightly condescending way. Essentially, no one would suddenly switch into Tohoku-ben and say iku ga rather than iku ka to evoke a certain feeling or emotion, as you've talked about. This is why, combined with what I talked about earlier, I strongly recommend sticking with standard Japanese. It's easy to study, easy for natives to understand, and it never requires you to give any sort of supplementary explanation. Okay, next. Lane says, personally, I struggle with pronouncing forms like passive causative, i.e. tabesaserareru. Any tips for repetitious R sounds? Julie had a similar question as well. Would you be able to go over pronunciation with a word like arawareru? I found that pronouncing the raware portion of the word is extremely difficult. Okay, so these are both great questions, and I actually have a fair amount to say about this topic. As talked about in lessons 51 and 52, many native English speakers, myself definitely included, have trouble with the R sounds because they curl their tongue back like this, rather than touching it directly to the alveolar ridge. In my experience, problems with consecutive R sounds often stem from this issue. Physically speaking, it's difficult to say the R sounds in quick succession if you're trying to curl your tongue back before each one. For this reason, practicing the R sounds from the contact position, as we've talked about earlier, can help a lot. Now beyond this, another practice that I've personally found to be a little bit useful is to try and say words like this with your mouth closed, as in arawareru, as it forces your tongue to work in a tighter space. Furthermore, making sure that the down step is on the correct mora often helps as well. We won't go into a review session here, but remember that it's not arawareru and taberareru, but arawareru and taberareru. It's not arawareru and taberareru, but arawareru and taberareru. So these three practices should help. That said, and this is certainly very controversial advice, but I think that you can make a decent case for avoiding these sounds altogether. Here's what I mean. In my comedic videos, every now and then I'll have a long line that ends with one of these very difficult to say words. It's very hard for me to nail the acting, say the complete line, and to do so with proper pronunciation. Furthermore, because I shoot while my twins are sleeping, like I am right now, I'm always very tense because I'm worried that they'll wake up, and this tends to exacerbate the issue. So 9 times out of 10, I'll simply remove the hard to say words. Rather than using arawareru, I'll use shitsugen suru or toujou suru. Rather than using arawareru, I'll use shitsugen suru or toujou suru. And rather than saying this, tabesaserareru, I'll switch the subject and say 彼が食べてって言うから, or something similar. And rather than saying this, 食べさせられる, I'll switch the subject and say, 彼が食べてって言うから, or something similar. Of course, this doesn't address the base issue, but it also doesn't sound any less natural. Furthermore, in my experience, passive causative combinations like this, 食べさせられる, actually don't come up in conversation that often. The normal passive form does, but more often than not, it's in the past tense, as in 食べられた or 言われた, which both have less R sounds than their dictionary form counterparts. So do use the aforementioned drills to improve your pronunciation, but also remember that there are multiple ways to get your point across in a completely natural way. Okay, so Nick says, I have a bit of trouble with the timing of Japanese. In a word like kokyo, I hold the pause between the ko and the kyo for too long. I also hold the vowel at the end too long, so it comes out as kokyo. I also have trouble with the timing and rhythm of words such as yukkuri, shuchu, oki, rippa, etc. Any tips? Another good question. In my experience, more often than not, this is actually a pitch accent issue. As non-native speakers, we often unconsciously assign the incorrect pitch accent pattern to various words, and this can also affect timing. I used to, for example, have difficulty with the word for spouse, haigusha, and said it with the middle bit too short, as in haigusha, haigusha. For some reason, I thought that it had this pitch accent pattern, so the same pattern as that of words like bonyari or soredewa. And again, because I was sort of mentally locked into this pattern, I kept saying the word as haigusha, haigusha, rather than haigusha, haigusha. I actually couldn't even hear the word correctly until I noticed that the pitch accent pattern I was using was wrong. So what do? First, try shadowing, but only after you've checked to make sure that your pitch accent for that word is correct. If this doesn't work, try to find a word that you can say which has the same length and pitch accent pattern. I was able to fix my pronunciation for haigusha by saying my pace and then humming the word a few times beforehand, as in my pace, haigusha, haigusha, my pace, haigusha, haigusha. In summary, timing issues are often caused by pitch accent issues, so first make sure that your pitch accent is correct. Alright, Simon asks, a little bit related to the kokkara and tokka phenomenon, but can you give some clarification on how to pronounce atatakai and its conjugations in rapid or casual speech? I feel sure that some of those ta and ka sounds must get dropped somewhere, but my wife strongly denied that my kino atakatta was something that natives say. Good question. So naturally your wife is correct. Speakers don't say atakatta, as you've mentioned, dropping both a ta and a ka. Speakers don't say atakatta, as you've mentioned, dropping both a ta and a ka. But they do say attakai and attakakatta, dropping one ta. But they do say attakai and attakakatta, dropping one ta. That said, as far as I can tell, this is an example of the wild vowel deletion that we talked about in the previous lesson. So even though speakers often do drop this single ta, it's important not to map this phenomenon onto other words like this, tataku, which is never pronounced as taku, tataku, which is never pronounced as taku. Unless it's one of the 100% predictable patterns that we've talked about in previous lessons, only mimic wild deletion rather than mapping it onto other words. Alright, Jared says, I'm very keen to hear about what no does to pitch accent. I think you mentioned that it was a bit complex once earlier in the series. Alright, so we'll actually be talking about this in the near future in the advanced pitch accent sub-series, but I'd like to briefly touch on the topic now as the general concept is quite simple. The particle no can often cause non-heibang nouns to become heibang. For example, while the downstep for Japan, nihon, is on the ho as in nihon or nihon ni, when no attaches to the end of it, we can pronounce it as nihon no nihon or nihon ni. When no attaches to the end of it, we can pronounce it as nihon no, as if it were a heibang word. Again, we'll talk about this in detail in an upcoming lesson. For now, just try and listen for it, and you should begin to hear it fairly often. Alright, and finally, Nicholas asks, this is kind of an abstract general question, but how do you know the difference between I'm pronouncing it wrong and this is just what my voice sounds like? Great question. Of course, there is the obvious, the various practices we've talked about before. Record yourself often, listen to native speech for multiple hours a day, have a native critique your speech, and limit your exposure to non-native speech. All of these are good, effective practices practices that I encourage everyone taking this course to utilize. That said, I think that one of the best practices for picking up on problems in your own speech is actually to take a quick but complete break. So I've been making my comedic lessons fairly consistently now since January 1st, 2016. And while I always try and identify and fix every pronunciation-related issue during filming and editing, I always find new things when I review footage that's more than about a week old. Naturally, this is because the mind has had time to wander, to pick up new information, and to process old information. So if you find yourself really stuck, not being able to distinguish correct between incorrect, despite knowing all of the relevant information, try to take a short but complete break. Perhaps try concentrating on kanji or grammar for a week, or try reading a novel in Japanese. Oftentimes, you'll figure things out immediately once you resume your phonetic studies. And even if you don't, remember that you'll undoubtedly pick up on other things that you weren't listening for before. Alright, so that's all the questions. I hope that my comments proved to be beneficial. This is actually the last episode of the pronunciation sub-series, and the next episode will be returning to pitch accent. We'll first cover some general, good to be aware of points that I've picked up on since creating this series, and after that we'll explore advanced subjects, such as the aforementioned no, as well as the pitch accent for names, counters, etc. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you very much for the continued support, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.